Everyone, welcome to another book review Wednesday, and today I'm going to be briefly diving into the classic tale of Vanity Fair. This one was written within the 1800s by William Makepeace Thackeray, Thackeray, yeah, I believe that's how you pronounce it. Excuse me. He just has a really long name for some reason. I believe that's because he includes maybe his middle name. But regardless, this particular book took me a very long time to read because it was super lengthy. It was like a brick. So after finishing it, I had to drop it off to the library, and so that it's the reason why it's not with me. Usually I hold the books within my hand, but since I'm not able to hold it, I am just going to address the book as is. Now, this is probably William's most famous work, and I think it's definitely safe to say why that is. I think he comments on a lot of things that were very relevant during the time. This takes place during the Napoleon War, or wars, I guess you could say. I don't know if they, I think you just call it Napoleon Wars, but because there was tons of different countries sort of fighting against each other, and in particular against France. And in this case, it focuses on two women in particular who live in England during this time. And obviously, during that time period, England was a big, had a huge rivalry with France. That has been something that's sort of gone on for ages. So it's not just in this time period, but in particular, it follows sort of the Battle of Waterloo at one point. But you'll sort of see sort of the historical background if you choose to read the story. And if you, in particular, like this sort of era, I would definitely recommend this book because it does sort of dive into things that are sort of very prevalent and would be relevant during around the period. But basically, the two women that are the main characters of the story include Amelia Sedley and Becky Sharp, or as some people call her, Rebecca, technically her real name, Becky, they just term as a nickname or for short for Rebecca. And so they are both from two very different backgrounds. Amelia Sedley starts off as fairly wealthy and prominent. Becky comes from a fairly poor background, and she sort of doesn't have a family initially, but they go to the same school together. And you sort of see how it starts off in the beginning, how they're sort of kind of graduating from the school, so to speak, and leaving, and they're sort of going and doing their own sort of separate thing, but they end up meeting up at certain points within the story, and you sort of see how their relationship develops and how it kind of falls apart, and all these different things that sort of go on within their lives and the people that surround their lives as well. I would say out of the two, Amelia is probably the most likable of the two. Becky Sharp has a tendency to want to rise through the social ranks, and she sort of does this in a kind of, I would argue, I guess, more immoral way. And she has sort of something always up her sleeve that she tries to pull onto people, and it eventually ends up hurting them. So I guess you could say that even though Becky came from the less lucrative area, she becomes a little bit more obsessed with social class and wanting to get a higher ranking title for herself. Whereas Amelia, she starts off fairly well off, but then she has various different struggles that end up occurring, and her family is sort of left worse off than they initially were. And you sort of see how she sort of deals with these circumstances. And again, that's really the entire premise of the story, is just to follow these two women within this particular time period. And you sort of see how the Napoleon War, in particular the Battle of Waterloo, affects them. The tragedies that they suffer, the triumphs that they have, all of that is really what this author wanted to sort of focus on. And I think he does it in a fairly effective way. The unfortunate thing is that this book is pretty lengthy. Yeah, like I said before, it's the size of a brick. So it kind of meanders on and on and on. And although certain aspects of the story I do find very engaging and interesting, I just thought that the story could have been told in a lot more, in a lot shorter way, and would have still given off, I think, the same effect overall. I think there is a tendency for the author to want to expose every single detail to the T, as opposed to really getting to the knit grit. And again, I understand wanting to spice things up a little bit and kind of sugarcoat things, and then you get into the meat of certain issues later on. But I think there was a way of doing that without making it over 800 pages because it is so unbelievably lengthy. And there is also a sense of determination with both of these characters, because you really do see how they want to survive within the sort of world that they live in, especially within that time period where women were sort of trying to, I guess, find some means within society to kind of survive and flourish and be, in some way, shape, or form, at least have security. And it's sort of difficult to do, as you'll see, with having a country that's sort of in war at certain points. So that's sort of what the story tries to bring about as well. So even though obviously I think Becky Sharp is a less likable character than Amelia, I still think that both of them are still rather interesting and well developed enough to get a sense of who they are as people and how they differ and how sort of their circumstances, although are different, you sort of see how they come about, how their lives end up towards the end in a rather, again, interesting way than what usually we come to expect from stories that are sort of based within classics, and at least based within classics that follow the 1800s kind of time period. So it's sort of nice to see it done in this way here, and you sort of see the you sort of see the different paths their lives go into. But I think that's really all I can say about the story without really giving too much away. I'd say if you are a fan of 1800 style literature, this one is definitely up your alley. I don't think you cannot pass this one up. I mean, it's probably one of the more famous works of around this period and follows people within England, and in particular women within England. So again, if you have that initial taste for that kind of literature, then this definitely appeals to you. And again, it offers something rather unique and interesting, because again, the way in which these two characters' lives unfolds and how different things and circumstances lead into what goes on within their lives, you ultimately see how it's rather different from a lot of these other 1800 style forms of literature that focused on similar aspects, like, again, obviously social class was a big thing back then, but also touches in on new things that, and goes in directions that usually, again, a lot of these other contemporary works of the 1800s didn't really go into. So I think, as far as plot and characters and whatnot, so I think that's something that's sort of important to understand. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say, though. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.